He was told his grandfather left him nothing but debt, but a single letter sent him to a forgotten farmhouse where he discovered the truth was buried under the floorboards, and his inheritance wasn't just land, it was a choice that would define the rest of his life. If you've ever felt like the world had already decided who you were going to be, then you know where this story starts. Stick with me, and maybe we can find a different ending together. Make sure you subscribe, because stories like these are a reminder that we get to write the last chapter ourselves. The day I turned 18, the world didn't celebrate with fireworks or cake. It handed me a black garbage bag and a thin manila envelope. The bag was for the few clothes I owned, a dog-eared copy of a book I'd read 100 times, and a faded photograph of a woman I couldn't remember. The envelope contained my birth certificate, my social security card, and a bus voucher for $100. That was it. 18 years, reduced to a single bag and a ticket to anywhere, which really meant a ticket to nowhere at all. I stood on the cracked linoleum of the St. Jude's Home for Boys administrative office, the place that had been my entire world for the last decade. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose face was a permanent mask of weary resignation, slid the envelope across her metal desk. The sound was like a blade sharpening. "Leo," she said, not looking up from her paperwork, "the state's obligation to you is now fulfilled. You're a legal adult." Legal. Adult. The words felt like a foreign language, describing a person I didn't know. I was the same kid I was yesterday, the one who stared at the water stains on the ceiling and wondered if he was a ghost. Where am I supposed to go? The question was quiet, barely a whisper. It was the question every kid in the system asks on their 18th birthday. Mrs. Gable finally looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something human in her eyes, a tiny spark of regret buried under mountains of bureaucratic ash. "There's a transitional housing facility downtown. The voucher will get you there. They'll help you find a job. You have 3 days before your bed here is assigned to someone else." 3 days. My whole life, crunched into 72 hours. I nodded, because that's what you learn to do at St. Jude's. You nod, you say yes, ma'am, and you make yourself as small as possible so the world doesn't notice you long enough to crush you. I slung the garbage bag over my shoulder. It crinkled with a sad, final sound. As I turned to leave, my hand on the cold brass doorknob, she spoke again. "Oh, and this came for you a few weeks ago from a law office." She pulled another envelope from a different pile. This one was different. It was thick, cream-colored, made of heavy paper that looked expensive. My name, Leo Sterling, was typed in crisp black ink. There was no return address, only the name of a firm, Albright and Associates, attorneys at law. I took it from her. The paper felt warm, important. "What is it?" I asked. "I didn't open it. It's addressed to you," she said. Her voice already distant, her attention back on her files. The flicker of humanity was gone. I was just another closed case. I walked out of that office, down the long, sterile hallway that always smelled of bleach and regret. The other boys, the ones who were still children in the eyes of the law, watched me from doorways. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. Their faces said it all. That's me in a few years. That's my garbage bag. That's my ticket to nowhere. I didn't say goodbye. There was no one to say goodbye to. The people in that building weren't family. We were just a collection of broken stories shelved in the same dusty library. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped out into the blinding August sun. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of exhaust from the city street. For the first time in 10 years, there was no one to tell me where to go, what to do, when to be back. I was free, and I had never been more terrified in my life. I walked for blocks, the garbage bag bumping against my leg, the lawyer's envelope clutched in my hand. I found a small, forgotten park, a sad patch of grass with a single bench under a dying oak tree. I sat down, the wood gritty with dirt, and stared at the envelope. My hands were trembling. Who would be writing to me? I had no one. My mother was the woman in the faded photograph, gone before my memory of her could even form. My father was a blank space, a name I never knew. My grandparents, I'd been told, had passed away years ago, leaving nothing behind but debts. That was the official story, the one neatly typed in my file at St. Jude's. I carefully tore open the seal. The paper inside was just as heavy, just as formal. It was a letter, and it began with the 3 words that would shatter the foundation of my entire life. Dear Mr. Sterling. The letter was from a woman named Eleanor Albright. She was a lawyer in a town I'd never heard of called Sparrow Creek. She wrote that she was the executor of my grandfather's estate. My grandfather, Arthur Sterling, a name I only knew from a document. The letter was dense with legal terms I didn't understand. Probate, beneficiary, fiduciary duty, but the core of it was brutally, impossibly clear. My grandfather, who had died 2 years ago, had left his entire estate to me. It consisted of a property, 600 acres of land, a farmhouse and a barn in Sparrow Creek, and a trust fund totaling $212,000. I read the numbers again and again. $200,000, 600 acres. It felt like a cruel joke, a misprint, a letter delivered to the wrong orphan. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the edge of the bench, the splintered wood digging into my palm, grounding me. Me? The kid who owned nothing but a garbage bag of hand-me-downs? The kid who ate what he was given and slept where he was told? It was impossible. Then I read the next paragraph, and the impossible dream turned into a familiar nightmare. Ms. Albright went on to explain that because I was a minor at the time of my grandfather's death, a legal guardian had been appointed to oversee the estate until I came of age. My uncle, Richard Sterling, my father's brother, a man I had never met, never even heard of. According to the letter, my uncle had petitioned the court, claiming the property was in disrepair and the taxes were a significant burden. He argued that selling it was in my best interest. The court had approved the sale. A development corporation, a company called Titan Properties, had purchased the 600 acres 6 months ago. As for the money, my uncle had submitted receipts for extensive expenses, legal fees, property taxes, maintenance costs, and a substantial fee for his services as guardian. The remaining balance in the trust fund, the letter stated with cold, legal precision, was $94.32. I felt the air leave my lungs in a single gut-wrenching gasp. It was all gone. A fortune, a home, a life, stolen from me before I even knew it existed. The hope that had flared in my chest for a glorious 30 seconds was extinguished, leaving behind a cold, heavy stone of despair. $94. That was my inheritance. It wasn't even enough to cover the bus voucher I was holding. I sat there on that bench for a long time, the city noise fading into a dull roar. The letter lay in my lap, a piece of paper that had given me a kingdom and then burned it to the ground in the space of 5 minutes. I could have just thrown it away. I could have taken my voucher, gone to the transitional housing shelter, and tried to build a life from the rubble just like I was always supposed to. That would have been the sensible thing to do. That would have been the St. Jude's way. But at the bottom of the letter there was one last sentence, a handwritten note in blue ink, starkly different from the formal type around it. It said, "Leo, your grandfather was a good man. I think you should come to Sparrow Creek. There are some things you need to see for yourself." And that one sentence changed everything. It was a crack of light in a dark room. It was a question mark at the end of a statement that had felt so final. I folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and stood up. I walked to the bus station, my garbage bag feeling a little less heavy, my steps a little more certain. I wasn't going to the downtown shelter. I went to the ticket counter and slid the voucher and the letter under the glass. "I need a ticket to Sparrow Creek," I said, my voice clearer and louder than it had been all day. The man behind the counter, a tired-looking guy with a stained tie, squinted at the letter, then at a map on his wall. He grunted, "That's a long way from here, kid, out in the middle of nowhere." I met his gaze. "Yeah," I said, "that's exactly where I need to go." The bus ride was a 14-hour journey through the night, a rumbling, groaning beast carrying me away from the only world I had ever known. I sat by the window, my reflection a pale ghost superimposed over the blur of passing city lights, then sprawling suburbs, then finally the deep, velvet black of the countryside. With every mile, the city's concrete grip on my soul seemed to loosen. The air that hissed from the vents above my seat started to smell less like diesel and more like damp earth and pine. I spent most of the ride staring out at the darkness, rereading Ms. Albright's letter until the creases were soft as cloth. Each word was a tiny piece of a puzzle I couldn't solve. Who was Arthur Sterling? Why would he leave everything to a grandson he barely knew? And why would my own uncle, a man who was supposed to protect me, betray me so completely? The questions circled in my head, a relentless, dizzying carousel of confusion and anger. I tried to remember my grandfather. My memories were faint, fractured things, like old photographs left out in the sun. I remembered a large, calloused hand holding mine, the smell of sawdust and pipe tobacco, a deep, rumbling laugh that seemed to shake the floorboards. I must have been very young, maybe 4 or 5, before my mother got sick, before everything fell apart. There was a memory of being lifted onto his shoulders, so high I could almost touch the ceiling of a cavernous barn. I remembered the scent of hay and the sight of dust motes dancing in the sunbeams slanting through the boards. Was that Sparrow Creek? Was that the home that had been stolen from me? The bus groaned to a halt in what seemed like the middle of the night. A single streetlight illuminated a small wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Sparrow Creek, population 1247. This was it. I grabbed my garbage bag and stepped off the bus into the cool pre-dawn air. The silence was overwhelming. After a lifetime of city noise, the sirens, the shouting, the constant hum of traffic, the quiet of this place felt like a physical presence. The town was little more than a single main street, lined with 2-story brick buildings whose windows were dark. A gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store, a post office. It was like a town from an old movie. I checked the address on the letter. Albright and Associates was on this street. I figured it would be hours before anything opened, so I started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet seemed to have a mind of their own, pulling me toward the edge of the town where the houses thinned out and the woods began to press in. A sign pointed down a gravel road, Blackwood Lane. The name felt vaguely familiar, a half-forgotten whisper from my childhood. I followed it. The road was long and winding, flanked by dense forests of pine and oak. The sun began to rise, casting long, dramatic shadows across the path and painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and orange. After walking for what felt like an hour, the woods opened up, and I saw it. It was a vast expanse of rolling hills and meadows, stretching as far as I could see. My 600 acres, or what used to be my 600 acres. The entire property was now enclosed by a brand new chain-link fence, at least 10 feet high. Every 50 feet, a large metal sign was bolted to the wire. In bold red letters it read, "Titan Properties, private land, no trespassing." A wave of cold fury washed over me. It was one thing to read about the sale in a letter. It was another to see it, to stand before this ugly, sterile fence that scarred the landscape and screamed at me that I didn't belong here. This was my birthright, and it had been sold off like a used car. I walked along the fence line, my fingers tracing the cold, unforgiving metal. In the distance, I could see the silhouette of a large barn against the morning sky, the barn from my memory, but the land around it was being transformed. Yellow bulldozers and earth movers sat silent in the fields, waiting to tear into the earth. Survey stakes with bright orange ribbons dotted the landscape, mapping out roads and lots for a future that had no place for me. My heart ached with a sense of loss so profound it felt like a physical wound. This was the home I never got to have. This was the legacy of the man I never got to know, and it was all being erased. I kept walking, following the fence as it curved around a thick stand of trees, and then I saw something that wasn't fenced in. Tucked away, almost hidden by a grove of ancient weeping willows, was a small two-story farmhouse. It was old, the white paint peeling to show the weathered gray wood beneath. The roof sagged in the middle, and several windows were boarded up. A stone chimney stood crookedly against one wall, covered in ivy. Unlike the rest of the property, this small parcel, maybe an acre in total, was untouched. A crumbling stone wall marked its boundary. There was no Titan Properties sign here. A narrow, overgrown path led from the gravel road to the front porch. It looked abandoned, forgotten. I pushed open a rickety wooden gate and walked up the path. The air under the willows was cool and still. The porch steps groaned under my weight. The front door was locked, a heavy, old-fashioned thing with a tarnished brass knob. I peered through a grimy window into what looked like a living room. It was empty, save for a thick layer of dust covering the wooden floors. Everything was draped in white sheets, making the furniture look like a gathering of silent ghosts. Why was this one small piece left behind? Was it a mistake? An oversight by the developers? I walked around the side of the house, pushing through overgrown weeds. In the back, there was a small cellar door set at an angle against the foundation. It was secured by a simple wooden beam, swollen with damp but not locked. My heart started to beat a little faster. With some effort, I lifted the beam and pulled the creaking doors open. A wave of musty, earthy air washed over me. Stone steps led down into the darkness. Using the flashlight on my phone, I descended into the cellar. It was cool and damp, with stone walls and a dirt floor. It was mostly empty, except for some rotting wooden shelves and a few broken clay pots. I swept the beam of my light across the floor, and that's when I saw it. In the far corner, partially hidden by a collapsed shelf, was a section of the floor that didn't look right. The dirt was slightly raised, the texture different. It looked like it had been disturbed. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt down, my hands shaking, and started to dig at the loose earth with my fingers. The soil was soft, and after only a few inches, my fingers hit something hard and metallic. It was a box, a small steel lockbox, heavy and cold to the touch. It was rusted around the edges, but it was solid. It was locked with a small, simple padlock. I looked around the cellar, my light dancing over the walls. Tucked into a crevice between two stones was an old, rusty crowbar. It was a struggle, but after several minutes of prying and straining, the padlock snapped with a loud crack that echoed in the small space. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on a bed of what looked like yellowed cotton, was not money, not jewels, but another envelope. It was made of the same thick, creamy paper as the lawyer's letter. My name, Leo, was written on the front in a strong, elegant script I didn't recognize. My grandfather's handwriting. I pulled it out. It was sealed with a wax stamp, an intricate design of an oak tree. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter began, "My dear Leo, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the world has already tried to cheat you." The words seemed to lift off the page. each one a hammer blow to my heart. This wasn't just a letter, it was a voice from the past, a message sent from beyond the grave, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was only the beginning. The world inside that farmhouse cellar shrank until it was only me and the letter in my hands. The beam from my phone's flashlight trembled, making the shadows on the stone walls dance. I read the words my grandfather had written, and his voice, a memory I thought I'd lost, came back to me, low and steady, filling the silence. "My dear Leo," it began again in my mind, "if you are reading this, then I am gone and the world has already tried to cheat you. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for so much. I am sorry I wasn't there to watch you grow into the man I know you will become. Life took us down different paths, and my greatest regret is that I couldn't find a way back to you sooner." A lump formed in my throat, hot and tight. He had thought of me. All those years I was in the system, feeling like a forgotten piece of luggage. He had been thinking of me. "I am leaving you everything I have," the letter continued. "This land, this home. It has been in our family for 5 generations. It is more than just dirt and wood. It is a part of us. But I know my nephew, your Uncle Richard. I know his greed. He sees this land not as a home, but as a commodity, a thing to be carved up and sold to the highest bidder. I fear he will not honor my wishes. I fear he will try to take this from you." My hands clenched, crumpling the edge of the paper. He knew. My grandfather had known exactly what kind of man his nephew was. He had anticipated this betrayal. The law is a complicated thing, my boy. It can be twisted. Documents can be forged. A boy in the system is an easy target. That is why I have set this up as a test. A breadcrumb trail for you to follow. The official will, the one filed with the courts, is a decoy. It names Richard as your guardian, and it gives him the power he needs to show his true colors. But this letter and what it leads to is the real truth. This is my real will. I had to read that part 3 times. A decoy. The entire legal process, the sale, the theft, it was all part of my grandfather's plan, a trap he had set for his own nephew. You found this box, which means you have my mind for things. You see what others overlook. That is the sterling way. Inside this box with this letter, you should find a small brass key. It is not for this box. It is for something else, something inside the house. Find what it opens. The truth is never on the surface, Leo. You must always be willing to dig deeper. I looked back into the lockbox. There, nestled in the cotton lining, was a small, ornate brass key. It was old, the kind you'd see for a roll-top desk or a jewelry box. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was real. This was a deliberate path he had laid out for me. "Be careful," the letter concluded. "Richard is not a good man, and the people he has sold this land to are powerful. They will not give it up easily. You are walking into a fight, but you are not alone. You have my blood in your veins, and the spirit of this land at your back. Go see Eleanor Albright. Show her this letter. She was my friend before she was my lawyer. You can trust her. She will help you understand the battle ahead. Your loving grandfather, Arthur Sterling." I folded the letter and placed it carefully in my pocket, along with the key. The cellar no longer felt dark and menacing. It felt like a sanctuary, the first step on a journey. I climbed the stone steps back into the daylight, my mind reeling. My entire reality had been upended twice in less than 24 hours. First, I had an inheritance, then I had nothing. Now I had a secret, a mission, and a fight. I walked back into the small town of Sparrow Creek, the morning now in full swing. The diner was open, people were moving along the sidewalks, and the place felt alive. I found the office of Albright and Associates. It was a modest storefront tucked between the hardware store and a bakery. The name was painted in simple gold letters on the glass door. I took a deep breath, the smell of fresh bread from next door filling my lungs, and pushed the door open. A small bell chimed. The woman who sat at the front desk looked up. She was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. "I'm here to see Eleanor Albright," I said. "My name is Leo Sterling." Her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, pulling the letter from my pocket. "But I think she'll want to see me." I held out my grandfather's letter. She took it, her eyes scanning the first few lines. Her professional demeanor softened, replaced by a look of surprise and something else, relief. She stood up. "Please come with me, Mr. Sterling. Ms. Albright is expecting you." She led me down a short hallway to an office at the back. The room was filled with books, towering shelves of them from floor to ceiling. Behind a large oak desk sat a woman who I assumed was Eleanor Albright. She had kind eyes, framed by wire-rimmed glasses, and a warm, steady presence. She stood as I entered. "Leo," she said, her voice gentle, "I'm so glad you came." The receptionist handed her my grandfather's letter. She read it, her expression a mixture of sadness and grim satisfaction. "I knew it," she whispered, looking at me. "I knew Arthur had a plan. He never trusted Richard." She motioned for me to sit down. For the next hour, she laid out the full story. She explained that my grandfather had come to her a few months before he passed away. He was sick, and he knew his time was short. He was worried about me. He had tried to get custody of me years earlier after my mother died, but the system had denied him. They'd cited his age and his modest income. He told Eleanor he was convinced that Richard would sell off the land the moment he was gone. "So he created 2 wills," she explained, her fingers steepled on the desk. "The first one, the one on file with the court, is technically legal. It gave Richard the authority he needed. We had to make it look real. The second, his true last will and testament, he hid. He told me he was leaving a trail for you, and only you, to find. He said he had to know you were your father's son, but his grandson in spirit." She slid a thick file across the desk. "This is what Richard submitted to the court to justify the sale and the expenses. Appraisals that criminally undervalued the land. Invoices from fake contracting companies for repairs. Bills for his legal fees that are 10 times what they should be. He's a thief, Leo, a very thorough one." I felt a surge of white-hot anger. "So we can prove it, we can get it all back?" Eleanor's expression grew serious. "It's not that simple. Titan Properties is a massive corporation. They will claim they are a bona fide purchaser, that they bought the land in good faith based on a court order. The documents Richard used are forgeries, but they are very good forgeries. To undo this, we will have to prove a conspiracy, to prove that Titan knew or should have known that the sale was fraudulent. That will be a long, expensive, and very ugly fight. They will try to bury us in legal fees. They will try to paint you as a disgruntled kid looking for a handout." The hope that had been building inside me began to fray. "So what can we do?" "We can start," she said, her voice firm. "This letter is the first step. It proves your grandfather's intent, but it's not enough. We need more. We need the real will, and we need to find the money he left you. Arthur told me he was leaving you a war chest. $200,000, he said. Not in a bank account Richard could find, but somewhere safe. Somewhere only you could find." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "He trusted you, Leo. He set up this entire, elaborate, frustrating puzzle because he believed you had the strength and the intelligence to solve it. He bet his entire legacy on you." The weight of her words settled on me. This was so much bigger than just money or land. This was about a man's last wish. It was about justice. It was about proving I was worthy of the faith he'd placed in me. "The key," I said, pulling the small brass key from my pocket and placing it on her desk. "He said it opened something in the house." She picked it up, examining it. The farmhouse wasn't included in the sale to Titan. Richard claimed it was structurally unsound and would cost more to demolish than it was worth, so he had it legally severed from the main parcel. He wanted to wash his hands of it. He has no idea what's inside. A slow smile spread across her face. Arthur was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He knew Richard's laziness and greed would be his undoing. He knew he wouldn't bother with an old, broken-down house. She handed the key back to me. "Go back to the house, Leo. Search it from top to bottom. Your grandfather was a carpenter and a cabinet maker. He was a master at creating hidden spaces. The answers you need, the real will, the money, I believe they are all waiting for you inside those walls." I left her office feeling like a different person than the one who had walked in. The lost, scared boy who had stepped off the bus that morning was gone. In his place was a young man with a purpose. I had a map, a key, and an ally. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a home to fight for. The walk back to the farmhouse felt different this time. The sun was high in the sky, and the world seemed sharper, more defined. The chain-link fence still felt like an insult, but now it was a challenge, not a final verdict. I let myself through the gate of the small, untouched property and stood on the porch, the brass key feeling heavy and significant in my palm. The house was silent, watching me. I spent a few minutes just circling it, running my hands over the peeling paint and the weathered wood. This was my family's home. Generations of Sterlings had lived and died here. My grandfather had walked this porch. Maybe my father had too. It was a strange and powerful feeling, to be connected to a place, to a history. I started my search. The key was small, clearly not for a door. It had to be for a piece of furniture, a box, a hidden compartment. I went back to the front door, remembering the boarded-up windows. With the crowbar from the cellar, I carefully pried the boards off one of the living room windows. The nails screeched in protest. With the boards gone, sunlight streamed into the dusty room for the first time in years, illuminating the ghostly sheet-covered furniture. I climbed through the window, my feet landing softly on the hardwood floor. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust and old memories. I pulled the sheets off the furniture one by one, revealing beautifully crafted handmade wooden pieces, a rocking chair, a sturdy coffee table, a tall bookshelf. Everything was coated in a thick layer of grime, but the quality of the craftsmanship was undeniable. This was my grandfather's work. My search began in what must have been his study. A large roll-top desk stood against the far wall. It was the most intricate piece of furniture in the house. I ran my hands over the wood, feeling for any secret buttons or panels. Then I saw it. A small brass-lined keyhole, almost hidden in the ornate carving. It was a perfect match for the key. I slid the key in. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. The roll top slid upward smoothly, revealing a dozen small drawers and cubbyholes. Most were empty, filled only with dust and the faint scent of old paper. But in the central compartment there was a single, large, leather-bound ledger. I opened it. The first few pages were filled with my grandfather's beautiful script, detailing the finances of the farm going back decades. But tucked into the back of the ledger was another envelope. This one contained a map, hand-drawn on old parchment paper. It was a detailed map of the entire 600 acres, but there were markings on it, notes and symbols I didn't understand. One location was circled in red ink, the old barn. Next to the circle, my grandfather had written a single word, foundation. That had to be the next clue. The barn. the place from my one clear memory of him. I took the map and left the house, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The main barn stood on the other side of the Titan Properties fence, 100 yards into the field. Getting to it meant trespassing. For a moment I hesitated. The signs were clear. The risk was real. But the thought of my grandfather, of his carefully laid plan, pushed me forward. I found a section of the fence near the woods that was partially obscured by overgrown bushes. I used the crowbar to pry up the bottom of the chain link, creating just enough space for me to squeeze under. I moved quickly, staying low, my eyes scanning the fields for any sign of security guards or workers. The bulldozers were silent and the property seemed deserted. I reached the barn, its vast wooden doors looming over me. It was even bigger than I remembered, a cathedral of wood and hay. One of the doors was slightly ajar. I slipped inside. The interior was just as I remembered it. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the siding, creating those same dancing dust motes. The air was thick with the smell of old hay, earth, and time. It was a peaceful, sacred place, and it felt like coming home. I pulled out the map. Foundation. I started my search around the base of the barn's massive support beams. The foundation was made of huge, rough-hewn stones. I ran my hands over them, pushing and pulling, looking for anything that was loose. It took me almost an hour. I was about to give up when my hand brushed against a stone in the back corner, a stone that seemed no different from the others. But under my fingers, I felt it give, just a fraction of an inch. My breath caught. I pushed harder. The stone scraped backwards, revealing a dark, hollow space behind it. It was a cleverly hidden compartment, no bigger than a shoebox. I reached inside, my fingers closing around a cold, heavy object. I pulled it out. It was another metal box, larger than the first one, and much heavier. This one wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, and I stopped breathing. The box was filled with money, stacks and stacks of $100 bills, bundled together with rubber bands. It had to be all of it. The $200,000. My war chest. Tucked beneath the stacks of cash was one final envelope. This one was thicker, heavier than the others. I opened it. Inside were two documents. The first was a legally notarized document. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "The true last will and testament of Arthur Sterling." This was it, the real will. It clearly stated that I, Leo Sterling, was the sole heir to the entire property and all financial assets. It named Eleanor Albright as the sole executor. It explicitly stated that my uncle, Richard Sterling, was to have no role and was to receive nothing from the estate. The second document was a long, multi-page letter. It was my grandfather's final message to me. "Leo," it began, "if you have found this, then you have passed my final test. You have the heart of a Sterling. You are my true heir, and I am so proud of you." I had to stop and wipe the tears from my eyes. A man I barely knew was proud of me. No one had ever said that to me before. The feeling was overwhelming, a strange mix of joy and grief. I kept reading. He went on to explain everything in detail. He told me about my father, his son, a good man who had made some bad choices. He told me about my mother, a woman he had loved like a daughter. He wrote about his own grief and how losing them, and then losing me to the system, had nearly broken him. He explained that the money was not just for me. "This money is a tool, Leo. It is a weapon. Use it to hire the best lawyers you can find. Use it to fight for this land. Our family didn't build this place to have it turned into a soulless suburb of cookie-cutter houses. This land is special. There's an old-growth forest on the northern ridge that is one of the last of its kind in this state. There's a stream that is a breeding ground for a rare species of trout. This place is alive, and it is worth protecting." The letter wasn't just giving me an inheritance. It was giving me a responsibility, a legacy to uphold. But I want you to know this, he wrote on the final page. The choice is yours. This is your life. If the fight is too much, I will understand. You could take this money and disappear. You could build a new life for yourself anywhere in the world, and no one would blame you. You have been through enough. You deserve peace. So you have a choice. You can take the money and be free, or you can stay and fight and be home. Whatever you decide, know that your grandfather loves you. I sat there in the dusty barn, the money and the will in my lap, the weight of his words settling over me. He had given me an out, a chance to escape, to have the kind of financial security I could never have dreamed of. I could walk away from Sparrow Creek, away from the lawyers and the corporations and the fight, and never look back. For a moment, I let myself imagine it. An apartment in a city, college, a car, a life without the constant fear of being hungry or homeless, a life of safety. It was everything I had ever wanted. But then I looked around the barn, at the light slanting through the boards, at the solid, ancient beams that had stood for 100 years. I thought of the farmhouse waiting for me under the willows. I thought of my grandfather, a man who had trusted me, a man who had believed in me enough to bet his entire legacy on the choice I would make in this very moment. I knew what I had to do. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. It was a calling. This was more than just a fight for land. It was a fight for my own soul. It was a fight to become the man my grandfather believed I could be. I carefully packed the money and the will back into the box. I slid the stone back into place, hiding the empty compartment. I would come back for the money later with Ms. Albright. For now, the evidence was what mattered. I slipped back under the fence and walked away. From the barn, not with the hesitation of a trespasser, but with the steady stride of a man walking toward his own home. The fear I had felt my whole life, the fear of being alone and powerless, was gone. It was replaced by a quiet, burning resolve. My uncle and Titan Properties had stolen my land, but my grandfather had given me something far more valuable. He had given me a purpose. He had given me a home, and they would have to tear it from my hands. Now, I want to pause here for a second and just talk to you directly. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It means you're not just listening, you're connecting. Maybe something in my story is ringing a bell for you. Maybe you've had to fight for something that was rightfully yours. Maybe you've felt cheated by the world, or by family, or by a system that was supposed to protect you. If that's you, I want you to know that you're not alone. So many of us are handed a story we didn't ask for, and the bravest thing we can ever do is decide to pick up the pen and write a new ending. The comments section of these videos has become this incredible place where people share their own stories of struggle and strength, and I read them. I really do. So if this is hitting you, I want you to go down there and just write, "I'm still fighting." You don't have to share any details you don't want to. Just those 3 words. It's a way of telling yourself and telling all of us that you haven't given up, that you're still in the ring, because that's what this community is all about. We're a collection of fighters. Now, let's get back to what happened when I walked into Eleanor Albright's office with a century-old will and the truth about my grandfather's legacy. The look on Eleanor's face when I placed the real will on her desk was something I will never forget. It was a slow dawn of triumph, the kind of expression a person gets when a long and desperate hope is finally proven true. She read the document, her fingers tracing my grandfather's signature. She then read his final letter to me, her eyes growing misty. When she finished, she looked up at me, and her professional demeanor was gone, replaced by a raw, genuine warmth. "He was a remarkable man, Leo," she said softly, "and he was right about you." We spent the rest of the afternoon planning our strategy. With the real will and my grandfather's letter, we had a powerful case. It was no longer just my word against my uncle's. We had proof of Arthur's true intent. The money changed the game completely. It was our war chest, just as he'd intended. It meant we could afford to fight Titan properties on their own level. We could hire the best forensic accountants to tear apart Richard's fraudulent expense reports. We could hire land surveyors and environmental experts to document the ecological value of the property, making a public case for its preservation. The first step was to file an emergency injunction to halt all development on the land. Eleanor got on the phone, her voice a calm but unyielding force of legal authority. While she worked, I sat in her office, the leather-bound law books surrounding me like ancient sentinels. For the first time, I felt like I had a powerful ally, that the system that had ignored me for so long could now be made to work for me. That evening, Eleanor drove me back to the farmhouse. We retrieved the box of money from the barn, under the cover of darkness, the weight of it a tangible representation of the fight to come. She helped me get the electricity and water turned back on at the house. It turned out my grandfather had prepaid the utilities for 5 years. Another small act of foresight from a man who had thought of everything. That first night in the farmhouse was surreal. I stood in the dusty living room, the single bare bulb overhead casting a warm glow on the sheet-covered furniture. This was my house, my home. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the presence of my ancestors, with the spirit of my grandfather. It was a comforting, solid silence. I didn't sleep in a bed. I didn't even take the sheets off the furniture. I took the thin blanket from my garbage bag, the only one I'd ever really owned, and I curled up on the floor in the middle of the room. I was exhausted, but I was too energized to sleep. I just lay there, listening to the house creak and groan around me, feeling the solid floorboards beneath me, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly safe. The legal battle began the next day. As Eleanor had predicted, it was brutal. Titan Properties came at us with a team of high-priced lawyers from the city. They filed motions to dismiss. They questioned the authenticity of the will. They tried to paint me as an opportunistic teenager and my grandfather as a senile old man. My uncle Richard was nowhere to be seen. He was hiding behind the corporation's legal shield. But we fought back with everything we had. We had the truth. We had the money. And we had Eleanor Albright, who fought for me like I was her own son. The news of the lawsuit spread through Sparrow Creek like wildfire. At first, people were wary. I was an outsider, a ghost from the town's past. But then something amazing started to happen. Old-timers who had known my grandfather started stopping by the farmhouse. A man named George, who owned the hardware store, showed up one afternoon with a toolbox and helped me fix the broken porch steps. He told me stories about my grandfather, about his honesty and his stubborn refusal to sell his land to developers for years. "Your grandpa loved this place," George said, wiping sweat from his brow. "He used to say the land had a soul. Glad to see you've got his fight in you." An older woman named Mary, who ran the diner, started leaving hot meals on my doorstep in the evenings. She told me my mother used to work for her as a teenager. "She was a sweet girl," Mary said, her eyes sad. "She would be so proud of you standing up for this family's home." Slowly, piece by piece, I was being woven into the fabric of the community. I wasn't just the orphan from the city anymore. I was Arthur Sterling's grandson. I was one of them. While the lawyers fought in courtrooms, I fought my own battle at the farmhouse. I spent my days cleaning, repairing, and bringing the old house back to life. I pulled the sheets off the furniture and polished the wood until it shone. I scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and cleared the overgrown weeds from the yard. With every task, I felt my connection to the place and to my grandfather grow stronger. It was hard work, but it was honest work. It was healing. I found more traces of him everywhere. In the workshop out back, I found his tools, his woodworking benches, and half-finished projects. I found old family photographs tucked away in drawers, pictures of people with my eyes, my smile. I was piecing together my own history, a history I had been denied my entire life. The biggest breakthrough in the case came from the forensic accountants. They proved unequivocally that the invoices my uncle had submitted were from shell companies he had created himself. He hadn't just stolen my inheritance, he had committed felony fraud. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation into Richard Sterling. Faced with prison time, my uncle's loyalty to Titan Properties evaporated. He agreed to testify against them in exchange for a plea deal. He admitted that Titan's executives knew the sale was questionable. They had pushed it through quickly and quietly, bribing him to get what they wanted, believing a powerless orphan would never be able to challenge them. They were wrong. The court overturned the sale. The 600 acres were returned to the estate, to me. The chain-link fences and the Titan Properties signs came down. The bulldozers drove away. I had won. Standing on the porch of the farmhouse the day the final judgment came through, I looked out over the rolling hills of my land, free and clear. It was a victory, but it didn't feel like the end of a movie. There was no triumphant music swelling in the background. It was quiet. It was just me, the land, and the whisper of the wind through the pine trees. The fight had taken almost a year. It had cost a significant portion of the money my grandfather had left me, and it had left scars. I had learned the hard truths about greed and betrayal. I had seen the dark side of my own family, but I had also learned about loyalty, community, and the enduring strength of a legacy. The victory wasn't just in getting the land back. The victory was in the person I had become in the process. I was no longer the boy with the garbage bag. I was a man who knew where he came from, a man who had a home. The money that was left I put into a trust, not for myself, but for the land. I worked with Eleanor and a state conservation group to place a permanent easement on the property, protecting it from any future development forever. My grandfather's wish to preserve the soul of this place was now legally guaranteed. My life in Sparrow Creek settled into a new kind of rhythm. I finished the restoration of the farmhouse, making it my own while honoring its history. I started taking classes at the local community college, studying forestry and land management. I wanted to learn how to be a proper steward of the inheritance I had been given. I wasn't just the owner of the land. I was its caretaker. Sometimes I walked the trails that crisscross the 600 acres. I walked through the old-growth forest on the northern ridge, my hand resting on the bark of trees that were ancient when my family first settled here. I sit by the stream and watch the rare trout dart through the clear, cold water. In these quiet moments, I feel my grandfather's presence most strongly. He's not a ghost. He's in the rustle of the leaves, the strength of the old oaks, the resilience of the land itself. He left me more than just property and money. He left me a compass. He taught me that an inheritance isn't what you are given. It's what you choose to do with it. He taught me that home isn't just a place you live. It's a place you fight for, a place you protect. And he taught me that the most valuable thing a person can leave behind is a legacy of integrity, a story of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. My story could have ended on that park bench in the city with a worthless inheritance and a ticket to a homeless shelter. That was the story the world had written for me. But a single handwritten note from a good woman and a series of letters from a wise old man gave me the chance to write a different story, and I took it. So as we come to the end here, I want to ask you to think about your own story. What are the parts that feel like they were written for you by someone else? By your circumstances, by your past, by the expectations of others? And what would the story look like if you were the one holding the pen? The lesson I learned in that dusty barn with a fortune at my feet wasn't about wealth. It was about choice. My grandfather gave me the choice to walk away with the money or stay and fight for something bigger than myself. And that's the choice we all have, in ways big and small, every single day. We can choose the easy path, or we can choose the one with meaning. We can choose to be defined by our wounds, or we can choose to be defined by our courage to heal them. Thank you for spending this time with me. It means the world to share this journey with you. If this story resonated, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a community here for people who believe in second chances, in fighting for what matters, and in the power of a well-told story to change a life. And before you go, I want you to do one last thing for me. Go down to the comments and tell me one thing you are proud of fighting for in your own life. It could be your family, your education, your sobriety, your art, your principles. Let's fill that space with a testament to our collective strength. Let's remind each other that we are all authors of our own lives. Until next time, be kind to yourself and keep fighting for your story. It's the only one you've got, and it's worth it.